So we take a deep breath. Just say thank you, Spirit, for this time. As we step onto this path that we call life, this journey full of excitement and joy, as well as disappointment and sadness and fears and concerns. Just take a deep breath and release. And we say thank you, Spirit. Thank you for the aligning of our minds and our hearts with the next highest thought. Thank you for this time that we are allowed to connect and reconnect. It is in this place and in these moments that we are reminded of our oneness. We are reminded of our connectedness to the greater good, to the higher expression. It is here that we remember. And so on this path, on this journey, we feel ourselves enfolded in the presence. We see ourselves held in the palm of God's hand. And we remember. And in the remembering, we are connected. And another deep breath. And release as we go deeper and closer to the true expression of who we came here to be. And we rest in the silence. So, stand in a place of celebration as we see clearly our connection. Find joy in this moment of remembering. We take that joy within and we share that joy without. It is in gratitude and in presence we rest and we know and we move forward energized, the very presence of Spirit within. We know this to be true. know this to be true. And so it is. And we're live. So after Helen's reading, I don't know if we talked about this or not, but that book is one of the main sources that I've used in the series that we've been doing of the 5 principles. And I appreciate and applaud your courage to read that section because I didn't. The book was published when?
2009.
2009. Okay. Lots to be learned in that one little passage. Heck, there may be a whole talk in there. So thank you for that. That's a good place to get me started. And you know what happens when we get me started, right? I'm going to steal that little mouse from you. Thank you. Live out loud. How many people feel like they're doing that right now? They're just living their lives out loud. Just as out loud as they possibly can. Yeah? Doesn't that feel good? Isn't that a great feeling to live out loud? And I love, you know how we use that little LOL, right? Well, I've decided now it stands for live out loud rather than laugh out loud. Although living out loud gives you a lot of reason to laugh out loud sometimes, right? So check this out. When the cats realized that Herbert had permanently taken over their favorite couch, they took action. Sometimes we have to take action, right? Just sometimes. Actually, it's required of us often. Live the truth. Live the truth. Live the truth. You know, we get into that big discussion about what that truth is. But in this 5-week series, we have, as I shared before, we've gone over the 5 principles. And so just as a really quick summary for those of you who did not have the fortunate opportunity to be here. Week 1, we talked about, of course, the first principle, there's one presence. We talked about moving back to center and stepping away from the duality in the world, that we no longer give power to the duality in the world. See previous paragraph. Principle number 2, our essence is of God, inherently good and expressed in Christ and expressed through us. We are inherently good, folks. And there are going to be a lot of folks this morning that might not be talking about that so much, and that's okay. But on this spiritual journey in this room, we are inherently good. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Amen.
We are inherently good, and we celebrate that. And we are co-creators with God. We are doing it all the time. We're creating the world that we're living in. The life we live in, we are creating all the time. Some days that's the good news, and some days that's the bad news. But we're always doing it. And last week we talked about prayer and meditation. Just the tools with the added bonus of denials and affirmations. Just the tools that we need in order to stay in alignment with the one power and the one presence, in order to remember the good that we inherently are, and to practice that co-creating with God. So principle number 5, and I would tend to agree with what Helen said. Some folks think it's one of the most important principles. And I tend to be from that school myself. And the reason is because it really sums it up. It's through thoughts, words, and actions that we live the truth we know. And Helen is right. You notice the word action is in all caps. Now that comes as a big surprise to you for me, doesn't it? That I would do that? Action. We live the truth we know through words and actions. Now, we've done a lot of talking about words and a lot of talking about thoughts as we've gone through these principles in the last few weeks. And I was ready to get to action. I was really ready to get to action when I left here last Sunday and I went home and I was licking my wounds. I was feeling pretty darn bad. I just wasn't very happy at all. Hard to imagine I'd leave a Sunday service like that, isn't it? I made the mistake of doing a head count. And I got really attached. And my first thought was, all right, that's it. Okay, everybody I know is going to get an email. Everybody I know that wasn't there is going to get an email. And I'm going to say, so we missed ya. I thought about that a little bit, but that might not be such a great idea. And then it came to me. In the talk last week, we talked about this study that they did, the Transcendental Meditation folks, that they went into prayer and meditation. And in a short, about 14-day period, they lowered the crime rate in Washington, D.C. by 23% by holding the consciousness that they were going to lower the crime rate. And I said, you know what, Penny, you might want to remember that story you told earlier today and think about what kind of action might align with that thinking. Because for me, action is about moving. And I can move. I got a lot of energy if you haven't figured that out. And action's about moving. It's about getting it done. It's about getting a hold of it and making it do what you want it to do. And so I sat in my beautiful little home on Sunday afternoon, and I thought, what are you going to do? Go beat everybody up that wasn't there? What are you going to do? Get angry at God? What are you going to do? Be mad because it was a beautiful day? What are you going to do? Penny, you're supposed to be the spiritual leader. Why don't you try some of that? Do you ever have those moments in your life that you have to have that out loud conversation with yourself? Stop it, I say. Stop it, I say to myself all the time. Where is God in this? God's right there. And so a thought came for me. I said, okay, God, you needed to be so big in the room that there just didn't need to be as many people in the chairs. You needed to be so big in the room, and you, Penny, needed to get this, that there didn't need to be as many people in the chairs as you were attached to having. That's spiritual action. And so I said, I had a conversation after service, and it was shared with me by Helen that at one time, a book study group in this community decided that they would hold the consciousness that there would be no fatalities in the particular war that was happening at that time during that particular week. And they held that consciousness. And guess what? There were no fatalities that week. I said, hey, maybe we could do that with the ministry. Hey, maybe we could heighten the awareness and the consciousness and take that spiritual action of truly seeing us be the community that we are called to be. And if that means 12 people in the room, then that means 12 people in the room. Get over yourself, Penny. And then I was reminded by one of my dear friends in this congregation. She said, well, you know, that isn't not really your doing that there's only 12 people in the room. I said, yeah, but when there's 30, I want to take credit. And I don't get to have it both ways. So the spiritual action that I was called into was to raise my consciousness, to connect back to what is the intention of spirit for this community, not what do you have to say about that, Penny. They give you a microphone every Sunday. Maybe you need to listen. Maybe you need to listen to yourself. Action. There's two kinds. There's spiritual and there's physical action. My lesson was to move back into the powerful place of action, and that is spiritual. That is spiritual action, folks. Now, that can translate into sitting in prayer and meditation. That can also translate into putting on a pretty orange vest and going out and picking up trash on the freeway. That can translate into, in your own personal, private time, of seeing a vision of this community, of your life, of the people in your life, the healing for the people that need healing. Or it can translate into getting up out of your meditation room and driving down to the food bank and serving a meal. So see, there's really not much difference when we come from that place and we move out of that duality that we were talking about, and we don't let the things of the world distract us from the spiritual action that is ours to take, because we could just sit there and be defeated. I only did that till about 2:30 p.m. last Sunday afternoon. But I did it. I did it. I was defeated. I said, you know what, God, it's as much work to put 12 people in the room as it is to put 50. Give me 50. I'm going to spend as much time working at it. We're going to have all these fabulous volunteers that show up and do this work. You know, these chairs don't pop into this room on their own. Ask my lower back. It takes physical action, but as those chairs are being set in this room, can I set them in the room with the consciousness that this is a spiritual action that I'm doing? Can I do that? Because it changes the whole formula. Now it's like, I get to go put the chairs in the room. I remember sharing this. I don't know if I shared this story before, but I had several folks that worked for me when I was director of operations in a large Unity church. And they were getting a little sloppy about the way they would set up the rooms for the classes. They were just getting a little sloppy. So, you know, I mentioned it and I mentioned it and I mentioned it again. Finally, one day I said, you know, maybe I should use a spiritual approach to this. I do work in a church. So I called these gentlemen into the room, and the room was empty. And I said, okay. I said, so you're going to come to this room and you're going to attend a class. So you're going to walk through the door and you're going to see the chairs. And you're going to choose a chair and you're going to sit down in one. That's no big deal. It's a chair, right? However, in that moment, in that time, you may, in fact, as that individual attending that class, have an entirely spiritual experience that transforms your life at depth. How do you feel about that chair now? How do you feel about that chair now? And I never had to remind them again, because it became a spiritual action. The forefront of their mind in their to-do list was to put God first and to allow spirit to do its work so that we could move into physical action. Do you get it? How's that feel when we think about this? Check this out. That guy took my parking spot at the Safeway and it was snowing. Now I'm going to have to walk at least 3 cars further. Could I pull into that parking lot and say, God is present. I am finding the perfect parking spot right now, and it may be at the back of the lot. And I detach from that human distraction of what it should look like. And I move into spiritual action and I put God in the forefront of my thought. I really like this lesson that's coming through. And it started last Sunday afternoon when I was pouting. It started then. Let's see what else I had to say here. Check this out. If you ask me what I came into this life to do, I will tell you I came to live out loud. When I am moving through the actions of my everyday, when I am doing the work that's in front of me, be it physical or spiritual, I can choose to live out loud in that. I can be out loud the human being that God has called this spiritual one to be. And I can pout even when I feel that way. And I'm loved, and God loves me, and I'm cared for, and it's okay. Go ahead, Penny, pout a little bit. And then you can even brag about it on Sunday. Yeah, that was pretty funny when that came this morning. Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. So, there are things in this world for us to do. There are things for us to physically do in this world, and there are things for us to do emotionally and spiritually. If we just sit there, that's exactly what we'll do, is we will just sit there. And there will be moments that we just need to sit there, and that's okay. But eventually, Spirit will tug at your sleeve and give you a little boot to let you know it is time to move. It is time to be the expression that you're called into. It is time to live the truth that you know. What else did I have to say here? So check this out. The time for action is now. It's never too late to do something. It's just never too late to do something and be the expression you're called into. We've talked about this, 2 types of action, physical and spiritual. So from that same book that Helen read from, I thought, uh-oh, she's going to read that same quote, which would be fine. Spiritual action means this: integrating our divine essence, check this out, into ordinary, annoying, daily living with its drudgery, confusion, and difficult people. Now, I thought those were interesting adjectives from a Unity minister. Helen Davenport has been around a long time, and she has written this book that Helen was reading from, and it's called The 5 Unity Principles. If you have any question about what spiritual action is, if that doesn't answer it for you, you come see me after service. Because if we can stay in alignment with that definition of what spiritual action is, we won't forget that that is part of, and that is what we are called into, not just as spiritual beings, but as human beings. So this is what I can tell you. What happens for me is I get into action and I forget that God's a part of it. And I have expectations and I have anticipation, and I think there should be 50 people in the room, and there should be, by the way. And how do I move into spiritual action, and how do I align with what God has for me to do and not get too carried away with myself? How do I stay active spiritually and physically and not cut God out of the deal? Because it can happen. I don't know about you, but it happens to me all the time. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. We're running a church here. That's right. And so for me, what happens is this, is I get lost. I get lost and I lose the balance between taking action and balancing God's intention for my highest outcome. So I got the answer. Well, I think I got the answer. God never made a table. What God did was God grew a tree. And he put that beautiful tree in front of us and said, there it is. You are one with the divine mind of God. What are you going to do with that tree now? God never made a table, but you can. And that is how you align your spiritual action, and you move it into action and not get lost and separated from the intention of God for you. The universe is ever conspiring. You've heard me say this a million times. The universe is ever conspiring to bring you to your highest and to your best. God never made a table, but she sure made some beautiful trees. In fact, there's probably a lot of folks that could be sitting in these chairs that are out sitting under them right now. And we celebrate at the beginning of our service about that, don't we? So don't get attached to that. God never made a table, but a tree for sure. Our spiritual action is to see the gifts that God has given us, to look at them, see them, look around, literally look around at these amazing people sit here next to you and realize you don't have to grow the tree. The action is to make the table. And at my house, invite everybody in for food. This is how we remember and stay balanced in our spiritual action. I have an acronym. I know it's a surprise. I am inviting you into, and Spirit is ever tugging at your ear, saying act. And this is what came from me. God is definitely not on daylight savings time because it's usually about 2:30 a.m. Affirming our Christ consciousness traits. When we start to remember that the Christ consciousness lives within us, that we are one with the one presence and the one power, that we are co-creating our life, and we remember and affirm the Christ consciousness traits within us, we will, in fact, act. And we will act from a place of remembering what God has intended for us. How many people God decides is in the room. What transformational experience happens in that chair now. This is who we're called to be. This is who you are. You are a spiritual being, and you are called into spiritual action. And we find the balance between the physical and spiritual action by remembering. We've been given all the tools and all the blessings. Act. It's yours to do. You're on, Marley.